The Sound Off Podcast. The podcast about broadcast with Matt Kundle. Starts now.
Did you ever notice that when David Letterman was interviewing a guest who was on a book tour, he wouldn't mention the book until the interview is over? There was a reason for that. When TV viewers and radio listeners know there's a book involved with the interview, they tune out. They know they're not going to get the whole story. Now, Julie Adam is not necessarily on a formal book tour, but with the release of her new book, Imperfectly Kind, now's a good time to reconnect. Julie Adam is the president of News and Entertainment at Rogers Sports and Media, and she joins me from her home office in Toronto. How have you been?
I've been well. How have you been?
I've been doing really, really well. You know, I've got more than I can handle. I've bitten off more than I can chew, and it's kind of wonderful.
I was poking around at the different things that you're doing, and it looks like you've got a lot of new initiatives on the go. Good for you.
Yeah, even if that means getting together with Dean Blundell to start a whole new podcast network. And I'm thinking to myself, now I've got two podcast networks like you.
That's right. As we both know, though, Matt, I don't actually do anything around here, though. So, I have two podcast networks, but I have a team of capable people that do all the work.
When I started out on the podcast journey, I thought I'm going to find the intersection between podcast and radio. And I didn't really find it. I found that podcast had more in common with books and magazines. And here you are, you've just written a book. What's the process that goes into writing a book?
I think it starts with, in my case anyways, because I'm not a professional writer and I'm not an author, and I'm not trying to make a career change. I didn't go at this as, I really want to move into becoming a writer. This is this great talent that I have that I think I've been ignoring. That's not the case for me. So the first step was years and years and years of self-doubt and an inner voice telling me that, I'm not good enough and no one's going to read it. And you're not a writer. Why would you write a book? Up against this passion, I had to do it. And I don't really have a good reason for why I wanted to do it other than I wanted to run a marathon one day, and I did one, and then that was kind of it. And so I've always wanted to write a book, maybe because I love books so much. I've always been an avid reader. In school where I didn't excel, and school was not a passion of mine, but I always loved any course where you did a lot of reading. And I have such respect and admiration for writers that I guess it just was this thing I wanted to do. So step one was probably for a decade, having an argument with myself about why I shouldn't do it. And then once I got over that, you have these moments, and I don't have a lot of them, but every once in a while you have a moment where you remember exactly where you were when something happened. I was walking my dog, and I started this back and forth with myself about, I really want to write a book and I should do this. And my, inner voice chirped back at me with the same story. You're not good enough. You're not a writer. No one's going to read it. And I kind of yelled back at my inner voice and said, who cares? This isn't about becoming a best-selling author. Who cares if no one reads it? And who cares if it's terrible? And I went home that day and I started another book again. This was maybe the second or third attempt. But I called this one, This Book Will Fail. That was the title of it. And I wasn't trying to be funny. I was actually giving myself permission that the real failure in this exercise was not that people weren't going to read it. And it wasn't that it wasn't going to be any good or it wasn't going to sell enough copies. The failure would be if I didn't do it. And so that was step one. And then once I took that leap, I didn't actually write that book, and I took some time off. I just went back to, I'm too busy and whatever. And then the pandemic hit and I had a bunch of time on my hands. And I ended up with an email in my inbox from a newsletter I subscribe to, which is a great reminder to, always remember that what you take in can help you. So make sure what you're putting into your brain or your body are the right things. From Seth Godin. And he was talking about this course, Writing for Community, that was meant for people that always wanted to write a book. And this course was for you. And they don't teach you how to write, but they sort of hold you accountable to doing it and publishing something. And so I joined that course and off I went.
I produce a podcast called Writing Class Radio, and every other week, listeners are invited to listen to the show and work out their shit to help get them published eventually. So throughout the process of writing, what shit did you have to work out while writing this book?
There's the practical side of what do you want to write about, first of all. And the topic just kind of came out of me because I've become very focused, I think throughout most of my life, for sure through most of my life, my end goal has always been, at the end of all of this, I want to be known as somebody that was a good person. I mean, that's really what I'm working toward. It's less about brilliant at something, and it's more about, okay, at the end, have I been a good person? And through that, I've gone through this journey about, what's the one word, the one thing I want to teach my boys when you think about legacy? And I decided the word was kindness. Because it was the one word that I thought that no matter what happens, from tragedy to amazing luck and great things, kindness was the word that I could apply to it. So no matter what, I can apply the word kindness to a situation. And sometimes it's to yourself, and sometimes it's to others. My boys are 18 and 15 now. So there's a lot of years of, this sort of journey that you go on to think about what's your legacy going to be. And as you get older, it becomes much more important. So that was, shit number one, was figuring out what is my legacy and what am I trying to do here? And then the second piece was really around self-doubt. As confident as I am, I don't love the spotlight. And so I had to really get over the fact that, this was going to put me in the spotlight. And I also needed some validation that what I was writing wasn't garbage. It wasn't so bad that it was going to embarrass myself. So this whole notion of bringing in people that you trust to give you feedback was the other big thing that I had to work through.
You've already referenced self-talk and how you talk to yourself. Have you been able to insert more kindness into your self-talk?
I have. COVID really has pushed me to the brink. So a combination of kindness and a little bit of practical coaching. The business that I was running when COVID hit was, demolished. At one point, we lost 70% of our revenue. And as somebody that sees themselves as, I take full responsibility and accountability for every decision that I make in life, good, bad, or indifferent. I had this incredible pressure on me that this was my fault. I'm running a business that's lost 70% of its revenue, and I can't figure out how to get it back. And it was very heavy. And through some coaching, I had some help with this. I realized this is not my fault. I didn't create the pandemic. I'm not the one in charge of shutting down, businesses and whether they can be open or not open. I need to focus on what I can control. I need to accept responsibility for things, but I didn't create this. Applying this sort of mantra of focus on what you can control lifted the weight off my shoulders, and it helped me be kinder to my team, because people can sense when you're wound up or when things are heavy. And that's really how it all started, with focusing on what you can control and being okay with it. And then the other thing on a personal level, I'm far more in tune with what's going on with me physically. Like I suffer from panic attacks, and I never really knew what they were. I mean, I've had them since I was a little kid. They kind of come and go. And it was only through helping somebody else through this that I realized, this is what happens to me. And so I named it. I have panic attacks. Okay. In my house, people know that. And so my boys know to say to me, like, hey, Mom, are you having a panic attack? And I can say, like, I need 10 minutes here. I got to go collect myself. And just giving myself that permission to say, yeah, everything's not right. It's okay. Call it out. Do what you need to do, and then move on.
So when you had a panic attack, was that really your normal for many, many years?
It wasn't daily for sure. And they sneak up. And I'm so wired to be positive and optimistic that these things would happen and you'd be like, wait, I don't get this. How can I be? No, I'm happy. I'm the happiest person I know. And then you realize, well, you can do two things at once. You can be positive and optimistic and happy, but you're also allowed to have moments of panic, insecurity, anxiety, stress. And I realized that, yeah, so much of my stress doesn't come out emotionally. I'm still smiling, but it comes out physically. I had horrible back pain for 8 months, and that was for sure stress. And so once you realize, oh, I see what's going on here, my optimistic brain refuses to cave, so my body does it. And that's what, okay, good. Okay, well, I can deal with that, and that's okay. And I can figure out how to navigate around that.
I know you oversee so many departments at Rogers, but I just wanted to sort of zero in a little bit on radio and COVID. What do you think COVID's legacy is going to be on radio?
Boy, I mean, the first thing I'm going to say is it has taught, and a shout out to everyone on our team, frankly, everyone in the industry, because what we thought was impossible to do, whether that's broadcasting live from at home, whether it's safety protocols, it's been incredible. And the team is so resilient. And so I think from a humanity perspective, it's just this validation and realization that, we are incredibly resilient people. And when we pull together and we are open about what's going on and we look to keep each other safe and take care of each other, good things happen from that. So that would be number one. I think the second thing is that we have to stop being kind of so tunnel focused, tunnel vision on what radio is, and there's only one way to do it, and realize, as there are a bunch of ways to deliver content to people in their ears. And some of that is on social too. So having our shows or our brands appear in social media or on YouTube or in podcast form is not only okay, but necessary. I think what's going to be interesting is to see what the bounce back rate is from a commuting and audience perspective. I mean, are people going to go back to work the way they were? Radio is so dependent upon commute time and at work time. And what's that going to look like? And are we going to be able to lean into what we're really great at and recognize that if we're going to be, live and in the moment and more than a playlist and deliver, people have tuned and continue to tune to news and information because they need the information, so that sort of like leaning into what we're really great at is going to be important. And I think it'll be important to see what the younger generation does. And I don't know that if you're 15 or 17 and, you spend a good portion of your time listening to Spotify or Apple Music for your music fix, I don't think you're going to suddenly, be less interested in choosing your music on demand, right? I think that that's a habit that people are going to hold forever. So I don't know that, being a playlist as a radio brand is going to be enough. And I think that COVID will leave that legacy with us, that we need to be more than that.
What's the value of kindness, and how is it going to be good for my radio career?
Well, I think as a business philosophy, here's my thing is, you start by being kind to yourself. So it's going to be good for your career because you're going to believe in yourself. Whatever it is you really want to do, you're going to go out and do it. And if that means hosting a live show, you're going to go out and do it. If that means doing a podcast, you're going to go out and do it. So from a career perspective, it's getting rid of all the noise around how you're not capable. Now, listen, I'd love to be the catcher for the Toronto Blue Jays. That is not going to happen. So being kind to myself doesn't mean being delusional. But I think from a career perspective, you got to start with believing in your dreams. What are you interested in? What are you good at? What are your dreams? Package that together and go after it. I think being kind to your audience. We're here to serve the audience. We need to be able to put them at the forefront. And so if you're serving the audience and you're being kind to the audience, don't waste their time. Don't spend, 20 minutes talking about something when you could have done it in 5. Don't talk to them about things that they're not interested in. Don't give them the wrong information. Don't give them bad information. Don't be boring. all of these, putting the audience at the forefront and being kind to them is incredibly important if you want to have a successful career. And then I think being kind to your teammates. We've learned nobody can do this on their own. And teams, Matt, maybe you can produce your podcast on your own, but at some point, you need a guest to show up unless you're doing a solo show. You probably need support from a promo point of view from partners. And so whatever that team looks like, be kind to them and give back to them. Be kind to your community. That's where I think kindness can help you in business.
Well, I'm here to tell you that that is an accurate answer because most of this company has been built on people who were kind to me along the way. When I didn't start out with much more than a microphone, but I met so many kind people along the way that I picked up or offered direction that it grew and grew. And in turn, I started to become kind to people and reciprocate. So I guess kindness is truly infectious.
I think so. Have you ever noticed that when you go into a room, let's say it's a room of half a dozen people and one person starts going negative, how fast that room can turn? And I think negativity actually spreads more quickly than positivity does. But it only takes one person in the room to do something kind, and then that spreads. And so we have this choice and this ability, who do we want to be when we're in the room? Do we want to be the person that drags everybody down? Because it's easy to do that. Or do you want to be the person that lifts others up? And I think you should, obviously choose the latter.
Think back to my yoga teacher, Darlene Svensson, yoga retreat. It had snowed. It was a Sunday. And she went outside and cleaned off the snow from all 12 cars at the retreat. And what a feeling everybody had when they woke up in the morning and saw that their cars had all been cleaned off.
There's a business advantage to that. I bet, you recommended her as a yoga teacher to others. I'm betting that if you have a choice between who your yoga teacher is going to be, you're going to choose her, and so on.
Every Sunday morning for the last 10 years.
It's amazing. Good for you. I'm sure she didn't clean off, those 12 cars because she wanted to, if I do this, these customers are, they're going to stick with me and they're going to choose me. I don't think people are, I don't think kindness, when it's pure kindness, I don't know that people are that calculated with it. But I think everybody understands that if you're kind to your customers and you put them at the center like your yoga teacher does, you get payback for that. And that's how you build your business and how you build your company and how you build loyalty. And that's loyalty with your customers, it's loyalty with your teammates, it's loyalty with your friends, and loyalty with your family.
There's more coming up, including discussion about baseball, the power of empathy, defining your competition, and a few more thoughts from the business side of podcast. To get a copy of Julie's book, you can find the link of the show notes of this episode. Also, I made mention of my Sunday morning yoga teacher, Darlene Svensson. I provided some links if you want to take a class or two from her. You can find that at soundoffpodcast.com.
The Sound Off Podcast.
I think back to 2020, we're in the throes of the pandemic, and there was a conference. I think it was the 2020 RAIN conference. And you mentioned that Rogers was going to be fine having two networks, and you have the Sportsnet side, and you've got Frequency Podcast Network. And as I'm sitting there in my pajamas, I get up and walk to the kitchen and I say, that is brilliant, because that is exactly what you should be doing, because the sports content is so much different than what you put out on the Frequency Podcast Network.
I agree. And we've actually pushed even further into this, organizing ourselves around content versus around platforms. We still have businesses to run, and, in a regulated environment, you have to report to the CRTC your television business, your profit and loss, and the same with radio. But from an organizational point of view, years ago, it dawned on me that it made so much more sense for news teams to work together regardless of the market that they're in, versus news and sports and music teams to work together just because they're located in a certain market. And I think as the content is obviously being consumed more and more digitally, as time goes on, and some of it exclusively through digital channels. It really makes more sense for the sports content team to think about creating sports content and pushing it out into all the different lanes. The same goes with entertainment. So our entertainment team is now organized together, and we have radio brands like CHFI and KISS now in the same, lane with Cityline and Breakfast Television, because they have a lot in common. They can share guests. They can, we have radio people that appear on Breakfast Television and Breakfast Television people that appear on radio. And then our news team is one. And, we can continue to push that content on multi-channels. We still have the podcast team in what we call a bubble. And, some of that is because when we made the acquisition of Pacific Content, which is a podcast team that creates podcasts for brands. So they do original content, but they only do it if a brand hires them to do it. There wasn't an obvious place to put them, if you will. I don't mean it that way, but they're just a different business, and most of their clients are in the US. So we left them in this bubble so that they could continue to be fast and nimble and do what they needed to do. And we put the frequency team with them, sort of. And so right now, we still have podcasting on a bit of an island, but we are thinking about, okay, well, the big story is really a news podcast. Our English news brand is City News. Those two things should work together. And now the big story and City News are connected. So it's a long explanation around organizational structure.
Do you get a chance to have coffee with Steve Pratt and Dan Meisner, who are two of the smartest guys in podcasting?
As often as I can. I don't physically have coffee with anyone anymore, Matt. But yeah, Steve is part of my direct leadership team. So, he and I talk daily. I love tossing problems at Dan Meisner. Whenever you ask Dan a question, and this is this is why humans are amazing. And why I love working with people is, you ask, and I don't even remember what the last question was that I asked him. I think I was asking for a podcast ranker in Canada. I had seen one that came out in Australia for Triton. And, I sent him a note and said, hey, does anything like this exist in Canada? And when you ask someone a question and then they come back with just such a thoughtful response, like instead of yes or no, it was yes and or no but, and have you thought about it this way, and what do you want to use it for? And he is so smart, as is Steve, and they're just amazing people as well and fun to work with.
I think the answer to that is a podcast ranker is coming from Triton in the next few weeks or months.
That's great to hear. I mean, it's interesting because we get digital data, which is our own proprietary data, and it's amazing. And, we have a lot of data at Rogers for all of our brands, but they're the aggregate, in a system like Numeris, the aggregation and the rankers are very straightforward. So in the broadcast system, every day we get a ranker on something. So you can see how you're doing within the ecosystem. With digital, it's the opposite. You know very well how you're doing on your own with your own audience and your own data, but more difficult to understand how that plays in the total ecosystem.
Got some favorite podcasts that you're listening to? And yes, you can talk about the ones at your network.
I do. Well, I'm on the Smart List bandwagon, which is probably not that new of a bandwagon. But I love podcasts so much. I've been listening to the Ezra Klein show, which I really like. I've become a bit of a crypto nerd. And so I've been spending a lot of time listening to podcasts about cryptocurrencies and NFTs and Web3, almost to the point where I just make people crazy, especially my husband. So there's a podcast called Invest Like the Best, which is hosted by Patrick O'Shaughnessy, and he's amazing. So I listen to him. I really like Scott Galloway's take on things. He's a kind of strategist, business marketing person. And Kara Swisher from the New York Times, and they do a podcast together that I love listening to. And then I am going to give a shout out to, the big story is ours and it's part of my daily. But my mind was blown listening to Island Crime, which is produced out of Vancouver. It's a partner podcast that we do. and the journalist Laura. This is season 3. And, she does a deep dive into a story. And the story that she's doing in season 3, it's terrible because it's the story of this, missing 4-year-old in Victoria from decades ago. And as a mom, it's a heartbreaker to listen to, but so well done. And she's an incredible journalist and storyteller. So I'll give that one a big shout out, which is ours.
I think back to the moment when I really decided that I wasn't going to be doing radio for a particular period of time. And it was Alex Blumberg from Gimlet Media. And, he said that one of the best things that audio is best at is creating empathy. And I didn't feel that programming rock radio or, hot AC really lent itself to that. And so that's why I took a deep dive into podcasting, even though it was going to be a big hit on the pocketbook. I said, this is the kind of audio that I think needs to be created. So can you speak a little bit to empathy and maybe how it relates to kindness?
Yeah, I think empathy is if you're being kind to someone, you probably start with the position of how are they feeling, which to me is what empathy is. There's a little trick I do in my mind when I'm having a conversation with someone. I actually try to visually push myself to be that person and see myself as that person. Even as you and I are talking now, I'm thinking about sitting in your chair and how do I make sure that the conversation that I bring, and I'm here working hard to bring a conversation to you, and what is this like from your point of view? And I think that's what empathy is about, is really not necessarily imagining yourself in that person's position, because I think that is too self-centered. It isn't about relating everything that someone's going through to you and how you've been through that. In fact, I think that that's not empathetic at all. It's not about you. And if the very basic principle you have in most situations when it involves someone else is that it's not about you. This podcast to me is not about me. This sounds odd, but it really is about you. You invited me on here, and it's about you and your audience. And so I'm thinking about how do I work hard to do the right thing by you and by the audience, not so much about me. So I think kindness starts with that. And then empathy is all about thinking about the person across from you or beside you and what it's like to be in their shoes at that moment.
I think back to radio and Radio Wars, and we need to take audience from this segment or this station and that. And when I got into podcasting, because it's on demand, what is perceived competition? So let's say another radio podcast like this one, they're actually your best friend. It's kind of like the Netflix thing. Hey, you just finished watching this. Maybe you'd like this. And Apple will do that frequently when you listen to a podcast. You just finished this. Here's something else similar. Your perceived competition is actually your best friend. And I know you touched on it in your book, and that's to be kind to your competition.
Yeah, I agree, Matt. When I started in podcasting, and I decided, I don't know how many years ago it was, that I really believed in podcasting. And I wanted to learn everything there was about it from a business standpoint. So I did what I try to do in these situations, which is consume as much information as humanly possible. And I set up, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 one-on-one interviews and meetings with people. And I just sort of worked my way through, oh, this person is in charge of this podcast network. I'm going to call them. And then, I'd hear from them, and then there's some other rabbit hole I would want to go down. And what I noticed was just how generous people were with their time. I found this to be true in radio too. There aren't many companies that I can't reach out to and ask for some input, but I found it to be even within this community where, as you said, you could be perceived direct competitors. People were just so generous and open. And I remember talking to Steve Pratt from Pacific Content about this, because he and the team at Pacific spend so much time promoting other networks and they had all these relationships, and it was such a wonderful community. And right now, all we're really competing against is time. And it's not about, yes, of course, there's a pie of share in a market and you want to win your fair share. You want to be number one, of course. I'm part of a for-profit business and I'm competitive and I want to win. But winning doesn't always mean that, it doesn't mean that you're going to win if someone else loses. It's not that obvious. It's not that direct. And I think getting out of this sort of headspace that in order for, me to win, X person needs to lose. And instead think about, for me to win, maybe it isn't about crushing the competition so much as it is about, how do I grow the pie overall? And how do I carve out a really unique place in this pie? How do I be kind to my customers? This is still a hard one for me, is to get out of this mindset of, and really it's the difference between being in a fixed mindset where you think there's a fixed amount that you can have and getting into a growth mindset where you think about, how do you grow overall? Which is what podcasting has done. I mean, there's not a fixed number of podcasts. There's to infinity of them, right? And so, you and I could go launch a new podcast tomorrow. And how would we make that successful? And it might not be about beating out another podcast. It may be about just doing something so great that people want to give their time up for it.
Because I have that on my list. You and I are going to start a baseball podcast.
Amazing. Sign me up.
I'm not surprised, by the way, that you said catcher, because I said if Julie Adams is going to play one position in baseball, I might have said shortstop, but catcher totally works because you've got the signs behind the plate. You can see the entire field in front of you, and you can direct some traffic, and you're ready to take the big hit with the collision at the plate.
Yeah, well, when I did play baseball, I started out, I think, at either shortstop or third base. And somehow I ended up catching, and I would say of all the things that I love to do, and I don't do this anymore, and I haven't for decades, is I loved being, playing on a ladies, whatever it was, fast pitch team, and being the catcher and going out to the mound and talking to the pitcher. That was so much fun. And I did have the collision at the plate where I was totally, run over. I'm not the strongest. And broke an ankle, knocked down, broke my ankle. For the record, I held onto the ball and the runner was out.
Do you think radio is going to get to a point where, its competition is really about all the stuff that they have to do in the day, and we maybe take our eyes off, where people go? Because, you look at Netflix, I always ask people, what's their biggest competition? And their biggest competition is sleep.
I do. I mean, I think we're almost there already. There's just so many choices. And, people can, even in their cars, it's relatively easy to do something other than listen to the radio. Certainly at night, when you think about when you and I started in this business, what were the options of entertainment you could have at 8:00 on a Tuesday night when you were a teenager and, it was a weeknight and you had to go to school the next day. Maybe you weren't allowed to go out with your friends. So you could talk on the phone, right? You could watch television, or you could listen to the radio and or music. I mean, I don't know that there was much else to do. Now, forget about it. So I think we're already seeing that our place is more about the moment and more about getting the attention of people than it is about just assuming that we're going to have this slice of life where people are going to automatically choose us. I think we're there. And I think we're seeing it in COVID. The amazing thing about COVID has been, even with things shut down, I mean, on one hand, you can say, okay, well, we lost, pick your number of total audience. But on the other hand, you could say, well, actually, we kept 3/4 of the audience, even without commute times, and even without people going into offices, and even without people leaving their houses to go to work, which suggests to me that, yeah, there's something there that people want to listen to. And I think as time goes on, more and more, if you don't have something people want to listen to, this sounds so silly, but they're not going to listen. And for the brands that have something that people want to listen to, they have primarily stuck around.
So layoffs and restructuring are part of any business. But why is it so different in radio? Why does it feel different?
How do you mean?
Reactionary. I think a lot of people hold on to it and make a layoff or a restructure part of their personality or DNA that I just don't see in any other business outside of broadcast.
I think there are two maybe major structural things that I think have happened. One is automation. And as you didn't need live humans to push the buttons at one point. I mean, a lot of us got started in that business because they needed someone physically to go from one song to another. So I think the first round came from automation and just a realization that we don't need board operators because the computer can do it. I think the second thing was consolidation. And when you have 4 businesses in a market, there's efficiency there. You don't need 4 accountants. You don't need 4 sales leaders. You probably don't need 4 managers and. So I think consolidation is a second piece. And then I think it's the reality of revenue decline. I mean, if you suddenly have 70% of your incoming income is gone, you're probably going to change how you spend your money. And maybe you don't change how you spend it in the short term because, I'm going to take a 6-month hit, but this business I'm building is going to grow back up and I'll hang in there. But when it's year after year of declining revenue coming in the door, you've got to either accept that you're turning less of a profit or you have to adjust your cost base. And I think those are the realities of business.
Who gets to voice the audio version of your book if it's not you?
Oh, geez. I don't have a good answer for that. Do you have any good suggestions? Because I'm terrified of naming someone in, the business that suddenly is like, oh, well, you picked that person and you didn't pick this person. Maybe I'll go with like one of my closest friends who's in the business, someone like Martine Gaillard or Liza Fromer. The 3 of us went to university together. I can pick them because they're friends and pros, and I won't offend anyone.
But you're going to voice it yourself, right?
I don't think I'm going to do it, to be honest. This was a thing I really wanted to do. I wanted it to be done by the end of 2021. I turned 51 in October. And my goal was to get it out before my 51st birthday. I had it in my head like, this is going to be one of those things on my list that I did when I was 50. I didn't hit that deadline. I just ran out of time. But I did get it out before the end of the year, which I was happy with. And I don't know what comes after this. I don't know if this project is just done and I say, hey, that was fun and move on, or if it has more legs. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I turned 50, then 51, and now I'm thinking about my legacy and what am I leaving behind? A trail of podcasts and somebody who's on a video screen and not brave enough like you to put on glasses and just admit the eyesight's going.
Oh, yeah, the eyesight's long gone. Well, you're surely leaving more than that behind. You've built, you're one of the pioneers in our business for making the switch and running your own business. I love that. I think that's incredible.
Yeah, I'm having so much fun. I'm so lucky. And I think back to all the great people who, whether it was a coffee or a lunch or how do I get a website or who's going to mentor me with voiceover or who's going to lend me toys. Hey, why don't you try out our stuff and beta test it and let us know? And people have been so nice in the podcast space. You go to the podcast movement in Chicago, 2016, and everybody's just so nice. And I'm not used to going to a conference where everybody is so nice and it's not Team Rogers, Team Bell, Team Chorus. And hey, be careful what you tell them at the bar.
We have a lot to learn there. I hope that one of COVID's legacies is that by the time we get back together, we've buried the grudges. And it'll be so wonderful to be back in person together that there isn't Team Rogers and Team Bell and Team Chorus. We have a lot to celebrate as an industry, and we have a lot to do together as an industry where we can still compete, but we still need to work together.
Well, I got to finish on a baseball question.
All right.
Should Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens have been voted into the Baseball Hall of Fame?
I am not a Barry Bonds fan, so I wasn't disappointed with that vote. I mean, I was a big Clemens fan back in the day, but I don't know. There was no love lost for me yesterday when that came out. Big Pappy, yes.
Yeah, I spent the day listening to sports talk radio, and it was interesting. It's just interesting to hear the conversation. It's actually one of the only times I've actually listened to a lot of baseball talk, but I was riveted by the segments, and it carried me through.
What do you think? What did you come away with?
I'm a yes guy. I think baseball needs to accept its history. They profited and enabled from that era, and I think what is the Hall of Fame? It's really a
yes, there's accolades for the player, but it's chronology, it's history. And I think we have to look at it and accept it for that. I think it's where it sort of differs between Pete Rose having gambled, where that's already in the books and that's not allowed. We didn't get the drugs on the books till 2003.
Yeah, I'm a yes person too, but I have a very strong justice gene. And so if it smells, if it's got that sort of like, I don't know where the justice is in that. It's not like they didn't get everything they needed out of the sport. And so I don't know, do we honor it? The problem with this rabbit hole, though, is I love baseball so much. The thought of in the situation they're in right now, when I really start thinking about the bad things that have happened in the sport and what's going on now, it makes me sad. And while I don't like to be ignorant about things, every once in a while, I just don't want to hear any bad things about baseball. I wouldn't have been cheering if they got in yesterday.
Julie, thanks so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on again. I love talking to you. You ask very interesting questions.
I make a list of questions and I don't even use those, and I just talk about the things that sort of pop up when I go. It's so much fun.
Yeah, you're very good at it. And I appreciate your support, and congrats on all your success.
The Sound Off podcast is written and hosted by Matt Kundle. Produced by Evan Serminski. Social media by Courtney Krebsbach. Another great creation from the Sound Off Media Company. Imaging courtesy Core Image Studios. There's always more at soundoffpodcast.com.